Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Teena. You're watching the global debate. This week, the World Economic Forum annual meeting returned to the Swiss ski resort town of Davos with the theme Cooperation in a Fragmented World. Leaders from around the globe gathered to discuss the various aspects of the series of interlinked crises facing the world. The impact of the pandemic-induced disruptions, the war in Ukraine, which has sent food and energy prices soaring, the inflationary pressures and the rising carbon emissions. After 5 days of intense discussions on these issues, global leaders agreed that speed, cooperation and resilience are a must to mend a fragmented world. A thought that corresponds with India's G20 theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family. Based on this principle of just, equitable and sustainable growth, India has embarked on a journey of transformation, emerging as a bright spot amid global geoeconomics and geopolitical crises, catching the interest and attention of world leaders and organizations. So the India story at Davos is what we will focus on in this edition of the program. To talk about India's resilience, transformation and vision, all of which were discussed and appreciated at Davos during the annual WEF meeting this year, I am joined by three distinguished panelists. Delighted to have with us on the program Mr. Anurag Jain, Secretary, Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, Professor Charan Singh, CEO, EGROW Foundation, and Mr. Pranjal Sharma, Contributing Editor, Businessworld. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program today. Mr. Sharma, allow me to begin the program today with you firsthand. Let's try and understand, as somebody who was there and witnessed the buzz around India, which has been unmissable this time. Give us and our viewers in this part of the country a sense of the India story, the narrative that India was able to build around its transformative journey that we've witnessed so far.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I think first I must tell you that I've been a speaker at Davos for more than 12 years. This was the 12th time that I was here. And every year, I think the narrative about India is becoming stronger. And previous 5 to 7, 8 years, it has made a bigger difference. I think what we have also seen is that the hype around other countries has also collapsed. So the investors, global investors, have realized that India is not just talking about what is happening, but is actually showing what is going on, and it has made its impact felt by actual change on the ground. Let me quote one. I had conversations with several global CEOs. One quote by Minister Smriti Irani resonated very well. She said that Martin Luther King said he has a dream, and then she said that. But our Prime Minister Modi has a plan. So I think what really worked very well with the global investors, CEOs, is also social innovators, is that India is actually making a difference. We are using technology for development. We are using technology for welfare programs. I think all these things were visible for everybody, and that has brought a lot of positive response about how things are changing in a country where there is very, very strong political and economic stability.
Right. Mr. Jain, a lot of the credit for India's strong presence and attention at Davos this year goes to the DPIIT. If you could share with us and our viewers the strategy that you followed in bringing the attention towards India and the transformative journey that we're witnessing, and what have been our focus areas?
Teena ji, we were the coordinator. The focus came because of the good work which has been put in by Team India. Actually, when you have a solid foundation, it becomes much more easy to project. But the strategy which we follow, actually in the previous Davos in May 22, also we had followed the same strategy. We tried to project one India voice. So we had a coordination meeting much before the actual program, with all the state governments which are participating, all the government of India departments which are participating, and the industry leaders. We also prepared a India story deck, which was the common, so that everyone is aware. Otherwise, one particular department does something, other department does not even know it, or leave aside the industrialists. They would know only things happening in their sector, And in other things, they would just have a broad idea. So a common messaging document which we prepared and shared with everybody, tried to explain it to them. Second thing is that what I was told when last year, May 22 was my first Davos after becoming secretary. A feedback was given to me that people from India were present, but India was not present in Davos. So because of this coordinated approach, what happened? Everyone actually gave the title India, the G20 presidency, and the messages which as a country, as a nation, we wanted to project, and their own names came next to it. Like state government, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, they were all there, Telangana. So India followed by their name. Industries, all big industries of India which were there, they gave India's name first, followed by their name. So this actually created a view that the whole promenade was India's promenade. So that was one thing. Second is the most important work, that if you try to project something in thin air, it doesn't happen. The structural reforms which have taken place in the country in the last 7-8 years, the government policies, and most importantly, the talented youth of the country. The biggest contribution to my mind comes from the startup initiative which happened, and public digital infrastructure. All these things have actually gone together. And Pranjal ji also had, actually mentioned that. So when we used to talk about these things, we would start that India has got the demographic dividend, India's talent, structural reforms, government policies, all these things are there. Plus, given the rule of law and the democracy, because other countries, some of them which have grown very well, but there are sort of issues with the governance. One can't be sure about the business environment. Here, we have a rule of law. So these things actually resonated very well. People are looking forward. The way geopolitical situation has changed. Even if you look at Mr. Klaus Schwab's statement, which he made yesterday, it actually resonates something similar.
You're right. In fact, what Mr. Klaus Schwab says, Professor Singh, he in a way reiterates what the IMF has and the World Bank have said in the past about India's resilience and the strong growth path that we have been able to sustain on. The question now to you is, what is it that has made the world today so bullish about India's growth? It was the IMF first, then the World Bank, and now the WEF chairman saying that in this scenario of global gloom, India is shining bright. India is standing tall as a bright spot. So what, according to you, has led to this kind of transformation regarding India's image at a global platform?
So one thing is very clear, that the policies of the present regime are extremely growth-oriented. And this is proven again and again. You look at the period when the whole world is in a slowdown phase, and when the whole world was suffering from COVID and suffering severe growth impact, India was on a steady course of growth. That itself shows that India has arrived. As was just mentioned, that somebody just had a dream, but the Prime Minister has a plan. It's so clearly reflected despite all odds and the whole world suffering from a COVID, a pandemic unheard of, unbelievable. The whole planet is under it. But have you noticed that even during that pandemic, the Prime Minister was totally confident that we will sail through it? And what was it reflected in? Please look at the policy responses by the governments in other parts of the world and India, both the monetary policy response and the fiscal policy response. If you remember, a couple of months back, India was still being ridiculed for not coming out with an appropriate fiscal policy, a sustainable model for labor. But here was India, who had come out with free food, increased the expenditure on Manrega, permitted free medicines entry of people into even private hospitals, free vaccinations, and over and above it, started thinking in terms of increasing capital expenditure, which has multiplier effect on employment and has a multi-year impact. This is the type of confidence with which the present regime is conducting policy. That is why the world is saying others may have a dream, but here is a plan. Similarly comes the monetary policy. There was no knee-jerk reactions. Systemically, carefully, wherever required, monetary policy accommodations were made. Interest rates were reduced. Consequently, what happened? In the Western world, inflation went 5 times more than normal trend. For example, if you take a 30-year average in the US, the average 30-year is 2% inflation. And now it is in the range of 10%. Same Europe, same UK. But in India, despite the Russia-Ukraine war, despite oil prices rising, despite problem on the wheat front and fertilizers, India's inflation is just on the upper side of the band, 2 plus minus 2. 4 plus minus 2. That means 2 to 6%. And our CPI, which we monitor as a monetary policy, has been around 6 to 7%. Whereas in other countries, if you take an average of 30-year and compare it, it's 5 times more. If you take in India a 30-year average of inflation is around 6%. Then look at the policies that came out at every point of time, and I really appreciate the way the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister tailored their policies. They would come out in terms of, just imagine a patient in the hospital looking at the symptoms, coming out with doses. Okay, let's give him glucose. Now let's give him crocin. And that is case by case, providing careful medicines as and when the economy. How much to be given to MSMEs? What about the Mudra loans? Right. What about the head cart load workers? Each one systematically taken care. What has been the result? Result has been, firstly, mortality rate in India because of COVID, very limited. Growth rate constantly steady, and not only steady, highest growth rate in the world despite all odds. Export performance, the best, touching new heights. PLI scheme did wonders there. And therefore, I say it is the world which is recognizing that this is the destination. Despite all odds, they have plans, and they have conservative plans, they have steady plans, they have no knee-jerk reactions. And this all is so beautifully reflected in the stock market. You're right. That is why the world is looking at India with hope, and also looking at India with a plan, what the rest of the world can take. The last point I want to mention is look at the financial sector. The banking industry in India, despite all odds, is recording lower than normal non-performing assets. The results are coming for end December quarter. And look at the results which banks are generating. They are generating very positive results. The financial sector is doing well. The fiscal policy is doing well. The monetary policy is doing well. And then if you look at the exchange rate, have you noticed the whole world is suffering severe impact on the exchange rate? But in India, the impact of the exchange rate is moderate. We have depreciated, no doubt about it, but that's in moderation. You have discussed about Davos. You know, the energy has been discussed extensively there. India is leading in solar energy and renewable sources of energy. Tell me, with all this there in front of you, good regulators, both SEBI and the RBI, and rest of the sectors that have counted for you, luckily agriculture has supported us. Obviously, India is the best destination, and that's showing up.
You're right. Not just one, but multiple fronts on which India has been lauded by world leaders, noted economists. Mr. Jain, coming back to you, one of the important highlight areas has been the fact that despite such uncertain times, India has been able to attract global investments, and that became one of the talking points at Davos as well. What, according to you, have been some of the reformative measures that we have ensured because of which investments are flowing in? And do we need to, open up a bit more in terms of the momentum to continue as far as investments are concerned?
As I started with that, last 7-8 years, we have seen a lot of structural reforms. Mm-hmm. Our FDI policy is one of the most open economic policies compared to any other nation. The areas where people cannot invest up to 100%, or where they require government approval. that list is actually very small, runs than a small page. Rest of it is permitted on the automatic route. So this way, the policy is already very open. There's no need to further open. Maybe if there is a small demand here or there, or some explanation, clarification somewhere required, we can always see. More important than that, what has happened, India's digital power. India has actually created what is known as public digital infrastructure,
Yes.
which is an open system, open networks, open source. So that has democratized the access to technology. And this is one path which is very different from anywhere else in the world. This foundation is started with Gem Trinity. We had what we call identity layer, 1.4 billion unique identities, which all of us know as Aadhaar. Then we had a bank account and we had a UPI payment system. And third part is the paperless and consentless layer, which is called digital empowerment DEPA line. So with these three layers in place, now we are in a position to build anything very quickly. So when the need arose, our CoWIN platform was created, 2 billion doses in less than 1 year. It is unthinkable anywhere else in the world. So when we share these examples, people actually are in awe of what India has done. What has happened, because these are all open structures, other people are able to innovate very quickly. On the same analysis, we have created unified logistic interface platform for logistic efficiency. We have created Pradhan Mantri Gati Shakti National Master Plan, which is for the infrastructure. That is another, of course, that is still within the government. So I'll not call it a public digital infrastructure, but that is also doing wonders. We have come out with ONDC, which will be very soon available to people for commercial use. It is in the beta phase right now. That is open network. So what it does, it reduces the entry barriers for the new players. Because if you're good in one particular part, you do what you can do. Rest of it will be provided by a collaborative network because it is open. You are actually all collaborating. Right. Say if you want to understand, for example, anywhere else in the world, excepting India, if you want to make a payment from one mode to another mode, like if you are in US, you want to make payment from Apple Pay, you can make it only to a person who is on Apple Pay. You cannot make to a person who is on Google Pay. But in India, you can do it because the foundation layer is UPI, which is open system, which connects everything else together. So that is the advantage. So if a new player comes, he creates some good app for his user base. He is immediately able to transact. He does not have to bother about acquiring the business from other people.
Right.
So this is one very important thing which has happened. And host of other reforms like company law, the GST. So people have started feeling the benefit.
And I think overall, the thrust and the strength of these initiatives has been that they've been inclusive in nature and they're also sustainable. Mr. Sharma, coming back to you, it's all the more critical for India at this juncture because we've taken over G20 presidency. We've laid out a framework wherein we are talking about human-centric globalization. Now, we've heard how India was lauded about its energy transition, about its digital revolution, which has been unprecedented. But how has the human-centric globalization policy and the principle resonated among world leaders? Was anything spoken about at Davos regarding India's G20 presidency and the expectations?
Yes, absolutely. I think one important aspect to understand was, again, something that Prime Minister Modi said, that G20 should be for G200. And I think that's a very powerful statement to make. I met several official delegates from various countries, including from emerging markets in African continent and East Asia. And they're all looking up to collaborating with India. I think one of the very important themes that are being explored is that how can there be a South-South cooperation? It has been talked about for several years and several decades. On ground, it has not accelerated to the level that it should. But on technology, on skill, on talent, on healthcare, education, there is so much more that emerging economies can come together and collaborate. Some of the Western templates don't really work in these emerging economies. There is issue of affordability, there's issues of adaptability, and therefore I think the expectation now from India are very, very high. And I think that is, in fact, some of our challenge that we will face in the coming years, that because we've had such a great track record in the last few years, people will expect more, not just investors, but other countries as well. And therefore, I think the G20 presidency, where we speak of G20 for the G200, has to deliver on ground. I think the start made by the Voice of Global South Summit was a very interesting beginning for this year. But it has to be followed through, where not just government to government relations, but private sector collaboration, investment in like-minded countries has to come together. They have to be joint ventures on that. I think from the other challenge which I would like to highlight is that while the global investors and other countries are very respectful and admire the work done by the central government in India, there are still concerns about what's happening at the state level. Because while the policy invites you, you come in, but when you operate on the ground level, things are still not as smooth. There is lack of consistency. Some states are better, some states are not. There are still certain questions about how can policy and some of these ease of doing business parameters can be improved.
Right.
So, for example, in a conversation with Arvind Krishna, he's the global chairman and CEO of IBM. He told me that I hope that we are approaching the end of license Raj in India, which is also a symbol. And he's respectful. He likes what's happening in India, but I think there is impatience from many of the global leaders that can India move this faster and faster and faster, because they would like to put far more of effort, investment, and initiatives to work with India. And finally, I think what they really appreciate, and I think they're realizing, is that India has become a great place to experiment with ideas that can work at scale. So whether it's health or education, social development, or smart cities, if it can be done for 400 or 500 million people in India successfully, it can be replicated anywhere across the world. So I'll stop at this point.
Clearly, Professor Singh, very important points. The fact that the world today is looking at India, the expectations are on the rise. From resilience to resurgence, our journey has to be marked by reforms, and that too at a rapid pace. What do you think are some of the roadblocks that we still are battling against, that we need to get rid of in this journey?
So let me just come back and connect with the question that you had raised earlier. Sure. I would like to mention the Prime Minister's One Earth, One Family, One Future, which he has brought to G20, is a very powerful message. And along with G20, the T20 is working extensively. And they recently had the Bhopal Declaration. And you could really see how vibrant that whole thing was. Because suddenly, now in G20, India is the voice for the South-South. So that in a way has given India a great edge. And the world is beginning to recognize that here is a country, and as just mentioned, instead of G20, why not G200? That here is a country which is willing to take the world together and therefore assume the world leadership. When China is down, America and Europe has proven that their policies, starting from the subprime crisis and after the Lehman Brothers, and the unconventional monetary policy has led on a wrong road. India's steady growth path, especially in the last 8 to 10 years, clearly shows that the leadership role is available. Moreover, the democratic values that India has. The other thing which I wanted to mention, the large size that India provides, despite all the difficulties and challenges like the COVID that we faced, is one market, multiple languages. That is unbelievable. And in this very thing, the technical support in Davos they discussed about the metaverse, the technical support which is being provided, and look at how we handled the crisis, crypto. While the whole world was coming to the pressure from the crypto, India was not. And the Jandhan, more than the Jam Trinity, the way we opened up the accounts for millions of people, and now there are 430 million who joined the banking industry. Okay, so this is where India is now positioned to take over. Though we may not, our GDP may not be as high of America of 20 trillion or that of China of 12 trillion, but the global acceptability of India's attitude towards economic issues and also political issues is gaining all the respectability and credibility. Right. And that is why the world is looking at it. Now, what are the challenges that India faces? One thing which I must mention before I tell the challenges which I think are there, India has demonstrated, in case there is a problem, they can announce a policy and after due consideration, need be even withdraw it. And agriculture reforms is a clear example.
Right.
The country is not ready to accept the agriculture reforms, whereas the policymakers and the politicians think that is the way forward. But in case there's resistance, there's no point wasting time in facing resistance. We'll come back, and when the time is due, we will go ahead with it. So I think the first thing that India needs to do is ensure that the agriculture sector is duly reformed. Lots of work remains to be done there, both in the markets, in land records. That is necessary.
That's right. So we've done a lot, but of course, a lot more needs to be done in terms of ensuring that we are able to sustain with the growth momentum. But I'll take one last question from you, Mr. Jain. The fact that we have been able to succeed because we've set ambitious goals for ourselves for the future. So now, because the Prime Minister talks about an ambitious agenda for India for the next 25 years, we want to transition from being a developing country to achieving the status of a developed nation. What is our vision 2047? Very briefly, if you could share some contours with us and our viewers.
Actually, the vision for 2047 is still in the making. There have been various groups which have been made who are working on it, and the groups are making presentations to Council of Ministers. Our group incidentally has made, and there are certain things which have emerged out of it, which is basically trade and commerce group. Yes. So all the industry groups, all the departments concerned. So basically what we are looking at, we carefully had three scenarios: the optimistic, the realistic, and the pessimistic scenario. The most realistic scenario tells us that will be a $32 trillion economy by 2047. And given the population of about 1.6 billion at that point of time, it will be $20,000 per capita income. We'll have about 20% of it coming from manufacturing. Basically, this is happening on the base of Industry 4.0, the structural reforms which have happened. We are going to invest in the emerging technologies, which are going to be the drivers.
Right.
The most important thing is the startups. The growth is going to come from basically three pillars of knowledge, innovation, and sustainability. And all the three pillars, actually, the startups are coming with more and more innovative solutions. India's startup ecosystem has grown to be the third largest startup ecosystem in a matter of just 6 years. And it is continuously growing, and people are coming out such innovative solutions that it has to be seen to be believed. So basically, the mindset of young generation has changed.
You're right, and you know, the budget is about to come. So what really the finance minister has to offer to boost this growth in the area of innovation and research is something that we'll all have to wait and watch. But time allows me to take up only that much on the program. Sorry to interrupt and stop the program, but we'll have to stop at that. Thank you once again for joining us on the program today, sharing your thoughts, your views with us on the India story at Davos. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you same time next week. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.